Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, aging. What does it mean to be a senior citizen? What does it mean to be called elderly? The terms we use to label people matter. In this episode, we discuss what it means to be a senior citizen and how people feel about such labels. More specifically, we discuss an article titled 7 Alternatives to Calling Someone a Senior Citizen by Sam Tetrault. So Corbin, I received a blog post from one of our listeners, and it's titled 7 Alternatives to Calling Someone a Senior Citizen by Sam Tetrault. Apparently, we call people senior citizens a little bit on this podcast, and people don't like it. And I thought we'd dive into kind of what do we call the older population. We're talking to a population that wants to age well. And for many of us, including myself, the term senior citizen really doesn't fit. What do you think we dive into that topic today?
Yeah, I think this could be a good learning opportunity for everyone.
So when we look at kind of where the term senior citizen comes from, first, I want to just kind of reference the article. The article is titled 7 Alternatives to Calling Someone a Senior Citizen. It's by Sam Tetrault, and we will include the link to her blog post in the description of today's podcast. And so when we look at the term senior citizen and what it really means, she kind of asks the questions, where does it come from? And it actually goes back to 1930s when the state of California started offering a retirement plan for people over the age of 50. And so hence the term senior citizen became more popular and more in use. And so kind of the question is, in today's age, is senior citizen or even the term elderly politically correct or polite? What are your thoughts on the term senior citizen?
My thoughts, I think it's definitely a politically correct terminology. I know some people don't like it. I know coming from a background where we worked with assisted living, we would either have to call them elderly or senior citizens. We were never allowed to call them old people.
Well, of course you don't call them old people, but
you can't say, we got a bunch of old people living here.
What is nice about calling someone elderly? You know, we talk about aging well, and if we're aging well, we are aging differently than the rest of the population. So here I am, I'm 60 now. I qualify for these quote unquote senior citizen discounts at certain places. But I certainly don't feel like a senior citizen, and I'm far from elderly. And there's other terminology I might prefer, but really age is just a number, isn't it?
Totally.
So why would your employment require that you call them senior citizens?
I don't know. And again, politically correct terms are constantly evolving. And keep in mind, this is back in 2013 when I worked there. So almost
That's not that long ago.
10 years ago. You know, a lot of things have changed from the last 10 years as far as what is and what isn't politically correct to say anymore.
Yeah. And I don't even like that term politically correct. I think it just gets overused, and we tend to categorize people, and we have to categorize them in these so-called politically correct silos. And it's like not everybody fits into all of these descriptors that we use for people. And so why we even bother using them? I mean, why don't we call Fred instead of, Fred's that African-American senior citizen over there with, it just doesn't make sense to me. It's like, just call Fred.
Okay. Yeah.
So as I look into this and kind of reading the article, she says, is senior citizen or elderly politically correct or polite? And it's just, one of the main questions about the term senior citizen is whether, again, it's politically correct or even polite. And it can, for many people, seem like a harsh term. Many will argue, as she says in the article, that senior citizen and also, again, the term elderly, and I would say even more so the term elderly is ageist. Because what is elderly? I mean, just because you're 80 doesn't mean you are necessarily, this weak, frail individual, and that's what I think of when I think of an elderly person. And I should think of a lot of people in their 50s that I would consider elderly, and a lot of people in their 80s that are like very vibrant and youthful. And it's often seen, particularly, once you hit about 50, it starts feeling a little bit more demeaning to be called, elderly.
Yeah, but we have terminologies for all age demographics, right? We have children, we have teenagers, we have young adults, we have adults. What would the next step be in order to kind of categorize
Well,
these age brackets, whether you're doing studies or whatever the case may be?
I think personally, I mean, once you hit adulthood, I mean, what difference does it make? I mean, is there a difference between a 30-year-old adult, 50-year-old adult, 60-year-old adult, 70, 80?
Yes, there is a huge difference. Look at the difference between our mindset, me being in my mid 30s and then you being 63.
I'm not 63.
Oh,
Just turned 60.
I thought you just said 63.
No.
Okay. Just turned 60. I mean, we're going to have two different points of views, two different perspectives. We've gone through life at two different phases. You've experienced life a little bit more. So things that probably used to stress you out when you were my age, it doesn't really phase you anymore because you've adapted to it. You've matured. You've gone through that process of living. So yeah, I do think that there are different categories as far as an adult goes because you've experienced life differently.
But still, everybody experiences life differently. And to label just the general population based on a number seems a little bit arbitrary. Now, if you're doing research, I understand the need to categorize people in order to compare, 30-year-olds versus 60-year-olds. You do need to maybe define them as, young adults, older adults, or something like that. But, I don't feel like I'm necessarily any different in many regards to somebody like my dad who's in his mid 80s. So the terminology can be rather individual, and it really needs to be addressed. And I think this is a good platform to address it, as the Aging Well podcast is, as we age well, what do we want to be called? And interestingly, the American Medical Association Manual of Style, which is how she cites it in this journal. I never heard of the American Medical Association Manual of Style, but I've heard of the APA. So I don't know if that's maybe a typo or if there's just two different styles in there. But in general, those are the accepted terminologies that one would use in writing papers and articles and journal articles and so on. And she says, while they say the term elderly is still okay when describing an issue related to the population of a whole, this isn't the everyday term. Instead, they're advocating for terms like older persons, older people, elderly patients, geriatric patients, older adults, persons 65 and older. Points out that it can be a little bit taboo to call somebody a senior citizen or elderly. And so what do people want to be called instead of senior citizen? And so the article kind of breaks it down into, I believe it's 7 different terminologies. I think we could probably even broaden that a little bit more, but let's kind of go through each one of these and discuss our thoughts on what these mean. And again, I think it might be a little bit different for you versus me because you don't see yourself as an older person, perhaps. I definitely don't see myself as a senior citizen or as an elderly individual. I'm somewhere in that middle mindset. But the first one is older people.
I don't even know where to start with that one. If we can't say old people, but we can say older people, that doesn't really make sense as a good substitution on that one.
Well, it just means, generally you look at like younger persons, older persons. So maybe not the most, I don't think, appropriate, but it's certainly, I think, a little bit better than elderly. It just means that, these are people that are older than others in the population. Definitely old people. When I hear old people, I hear end of life people. These are people that are running away from the Grim Reaper. And just at what point do you become old? I mean, I know a lot of people your age that behave very old or, are rather old.
The old souls.
No, not old souls. I mean, I'm fine with old souls. I mean, there's kids that are in their teenage years or even younger that are, I would consider kind of old souls. They have that certain wisdom to them, or they have that certain character about them that give them kind of wisdom and, an older kind of personality to them. And I don't find that a fault. But when you talk old people, you're talking people that are really old and kind of decrepit. And so, you can have people who are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s who really physically are pretty old behaving. They have gotten weak and frail and sickly, and they're in worse shape than some people decades older than them.
Yeah.
So older people is not a bad term. I think it really needs some level of qualification when you're using the term, and I think it's probably more appropriate in writing and describing populations. Like I remember one class a number of years ago, a student was talking about he was going to address that he divided up his populations into like young people and older people. And I asked him how he was defining older people. He said, people over 35. I said, dude, over 35, that's not old. And so, you can use it to kind of categorize, young versus old, but still, at what point are we defining that cutoff point? At what point do you go from being young to old? It just, to me, you don't celebrate a birthday. When I celebrated my 60th birthday, it was just another day. It's like, oh, I didn't just graduate into old age. I same today as I was yesterday, and hopefully maybe even better than I was yesterday. And so I'm not a huge fan of older people in general, but it is a lot better, I think, than senior citizens and elders, or elderly rather. I don't mind elder. Elder's a decent word because, the elders in society are generally the senior population, the wise, the honored people in those populations. And I think a lot of populations that really honor their seniors are people who refer to their older individuals as elders.
Well, let's dive into number 2, where we're just changing the first vowel on elders from an E to an O. And option number 2 is olders. What do you think about that terminology?
I think it just sounds a little weird. It can have a certain ring to it. I mean, we do talk about youngsters and oldsters, but I don't know. I personally feel like it would seem a little bit kind of...
I feel like that's more derogatory than...
It depends, I think, where it's coming from. It's like when it's coming from, young teenagers, oh, you olders. It feels almost like it's just mocking the age difference. And I think there's a huge difference between elder and older. And personally, I would not favor using older like I would use youngster. And I don't even refer to people as youngers. Youngsters, or would we say oldsters? It just, I don't know. It sounds a little bit too trendy, too trying to be hipster here. I drink my Pabst Blue Ribbon with my oldster friends or my older friends.
To me, it just sounds more elementary, right? Like you're a little kid on the playground and you're like, the older kids, they're doing this. And yeah, I think older or olders I don't like that. I don't like that term. I don't think that should be an option.
I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging. Well, number 3 is perennials. Common play on words. It comes from the play on millennials. says here, it's easy to see why this is a favorite on social media and beyond. And it's supposed to be helping languages keep up with the times. What do you think of perennials?
I actually like the term perennials. Maybe it's because I am a millennial, and so it is a play on words. And another nickname for millennials is actually echo boomers, meaning we're kind of following the trend of the baby boomers of having everything, just that big explosion. And so we're the echo boomers is also another one of our nicknames. So if baby boomers wants to have another nickname that kind of resembles a millennial and they want to go with perennials, then go for it. I'm all for that one. I think that logically makes sense to me.
I mean, I think it'll make sense for a while, but in a few years when millennials start to hit the age of maturity, if we call becoming a older adult or a senior or whatever we're going to call ourselves, as they start hitting that age, then they're still millennials. So it's kind of a term I think that maybe seems trendy and hipster now, but in a few years it's going to kind of wear its welcome because suddenly the perennials are no longer existing. It's the millennials. Now, hopefully some of us so-called perennials will be living for another 40, 50 years. So it might give a little bit of life to it, but eventually it kind of loses its life. So and it's only relevant to the birth years of the individuals.
Right.
So you'd really be looking at your perennials being people that are born, somewhere between the millennials and the baby boomers. And so, probably born late 50s, early 60s, and earlier would become kind of what could be a perennial. So I don't like that one either. Number 4 is seniors. Now, it says that though senior citizen is seen as patronizing, the same isn't said for the shortened senior. So it's excluding the term citizen seems a little bit more humane, more human, more lighthearted, and it gives a little bit more flexibility. I don't mind senior, because I think of, in high school you have, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. It's that category of belonging, so, if we call seniors, and maybe, those that are just prior to the seniors are maybe juniors, kind of young adult, juniors, seniors. I don't know. What do you think of senior?
Like I said, I don't think it's that bad of a terminology. I do think it's funny that we're bringing this up because I just went to dinner with someone and they were talking about high school graduation, but then at some point, because they're talking about high school graduation because their kids are in high school, they're going to be graduating soon. They were talking about event planning for prom. And then at some point in time, the conversation made a turn and they started talking about volunteering at like a senior center, for that age bracket. And they're like, yeah, I was working with the seniors and we started doing bingo. And I was like, wait, high school kids are doing bingo? Because we went from talking about high school seniors to actual, people in that age bracket of being, they're like, no, the senior citizen, like the older people. And I was like, okay, I got it. So I don't know. I don't think I like the terminology seniors. I think it is a level of, I don't think it should be disrespectful. I don't even think senior citizens should be a derogatory term. I think
it's not a matter of what we perceive it to be. It's what others perceive it to be, what the recipient perceives it to be. And I think, it's worth having a conversation if some people are going to feel like senior citizen doesn't fit me, or I don't like that terminology. I find it patronizing, or whatever the reasons might be. And it's like, well, what are better terms that we can use to better address the broader population to make people feel a bit more comfortable in what we're being called? Because it's like a lot of the terms that we use in society, we may feel very, very comfortable with it, but the recipient does not feel comfortable with it. I can think of the word Negro. I learned in college English class, our professor was pretty cool. I liked him. And he brought up a bunch of terms that we don't use in society because the alternative we don't use either. It's like, if we don't call people Negroes because we don't call white people Blancos, right? But it was a term that was used for years for population, and it was never well accepted by people of color. And just because we may feel comfortable with the term doesn't mean it's a useful term to use, because it becomes offensive to other people. Mm. And so I think, it's important to have this kind of conversation. What do we call people? Especially as, we're dealing with the aging population and wanting people to feel very comfortable with being older and welcoming those later years, because they're going to be better quality years, and not being something that we have a negative connotation to. It shouldn't be something that is dreaded to get older. It should be something that is welcomed and kind of an honor to individuals as they get older.
And maybe that's why I don't feel that it's such a derogatory term, because I view the term senior as an honor. Like, you've earned that terminology.
Senior citizen is a different term than senior.
Yeah, but you're still a citizen in a community. You still have lived life. You still have put in your dues, and now you're on kind of top of the chain as a citizen in that little area. So you're the senior at that point. So that's why in my brain, I don't really view it as a derogatory term, but more of a term of respect, I guess. So
yeah, I don't know. I still don't like senior citizen. And I definitely don't like elderly for a general term.
Now, do you don't like it because of what our society connects it as? Like, if some of us say the term senior citizen, right, our brains automatically kind of form a vision of someone or something. Like, we've kind of put, whether it's our brain is visualizing someone in that geriatric community or in that geriatric demographic, whether that individual is fit and healthy, or whether they're, as you use the terminology, just barely avoiding the Grim Reaper at that point. Is that where we don't like the term because of how we visualize it?
Well, I think you just used the term geriatric. How are you using the term geriatric? At what point do you start referring to somebody as geriatric?
I think a geriatric would be the age bracket that's right after middle-aged. I think that's where we would turn. Just like, again, we have children, we have teens, we have young adults, we have adults, we have middle-aged. And I think geriatric would be right there.
Let's look up the term geriatrics. I have to take a pause here for a moment while I do this. So just a quick look up of the definition of geriatric. This is from the Oxford language. I'm just looking, I Googled it. So it says relating to old people, especially with regard to their health care. And then it's an old person who is receiving special care. So right. Geriatric and senior citizen put together would imply then that those who are called a senior citizen are ones that are old and in declining health.
Okay.
So you're seeing where people can make that connection and find it a little bit more bothersome.
Right. But we can also use the term pediatric for children at the same time. So that's geriatric is on that far end. The older individuals needing help. Pediatric would be on the opposite end of that spectrum of a younger individual needing health.
True. And generally, pediatric is considered, anybody who is under the age of 18 goes to a pediatrician.
Right.
Again, it's a very arbitrary age, and at what point do we really classify somebody as no longer pediatric? My son's 17 and he still has to go to a pediatrician. And it just seems weird to consider him going to a pediatrician. The kid's like 6'3", 210 pounds. Not what I would consider, somebody needing a pediatrician, but that's kind of the language we use. But that's a little less patronizing. It's just, that's the age category. Nobody finds it a negative to be younger, but many people will find it a negative to be considered older. And so as soon as you refer to somebody as geriatric or a senior citizen, and the perception is, or at least the assumption is, that you're perceiving them as being old and in need of medical care rather than being a vibrant, contributing member of society.
Yeah, but if age is only a number, who cares what category you're in, right?
Well, people don't necessarily know how you're categorizing those people.
Well, I think we just using medical terminologies, if we have a terminology for pediatrics and that's within a certain age group, a certain demographic, and we have a terminology of geriatrics and that's in a certain demographic, those are just medical terms. I don't, like you said, your 17-year-old son would be going to a pediatrician, but he's not a child. He's a teenager. A geriatric, that could be anyone between whatever the age bracket you want if they fall in that category. But again, age is just a number. I think people are so worked up about the term senior citizen or geriatric or older people or whatever because no one wants to, quote unquote, be old. We all want to age well, but no one wants to get older. By getting older, we're kind of hitting that realization of, oh man, I'm losing my youth. But you don't have to. There's an age mindset.
Well, and again, that's where the ageism comes into play here, that if people don't want to be perceived as getting old, again, an age is just a number. So when I hit a certain number and I get referred to as a senior citizen or as a geriatric, but I'm in vibrant health, I'm in better health than most 40-year-olds, why should I have that label that is associated with declining health and, nearing the end of life? Why can't we just simply refer to people in a way that emphasizes, yes, that we are older in number, but that does not reflect our condition of health and well-being?
You'd be a super ager then, right? We're kind of working with that terminology.
Well, I mean, even the term super aging, I don't necessarily associate that with vibrant health either. I mean, as we kind of read through the book and as we've talked with David Kravitz and Larry Wolf, it is a mindset of aging. Larry, we talked about having his vision problems and things like that. I mean, he's still got issues, and I forget what Larry's age was, but we can be super aging as an attitude, but it still doesn't necessarily reflect our physicality, our health, and our overall well-being. It generally, I think, see people who are approaching ages, super agers, are going to be in better overall health and things like that. But, we can't just kind of look at aging as being a decline in health and well-being because of a number. And that's where I think people come into, opposition to using some of the terms like elderly and senior citizen, because, to me, an 85-year-old, you look at Jack LaLanne and, his latter years. Was he elderly? The guy wasn't frail, but, I see people 20 years younger than him that I would consider elderly and frail. And so the numbers don't necessarily match up with the condition.
But there's anomalies in every single category, right? If we go back to the terminology millennial, how society views it, they clump a bunch of people together that are hypersensitive, that are filled with anxiety, that don't want to work together.
When you were born, it has
no,
nothing to do.
I would say the internet would say something different. The internet,
I don't listen to the internet. I mean, yes, people will categorize millennials as being certain things, but And again, that's why I don't like even using those terms.
But there's still those outliers, is what I'm saying. There's still those outliers that.
What outliers? If you are born, whatever the years, I forget the years of millennials because this whole having to categorize people is just so freaking stupid to me anyhow. But, I know that as a baby boomer, I'm at the end of the baby boomers, and they actually have other terms for us. But generally, baby boomer ends somewhere around 1963, 1964, I think, is when the end of the baby boomers definitely ended. But it's just a number. It's just I'm categorized that. If I was born 2 years later, I would be in a different category. And so those categorizations are just based on a number. And, if you're going to use a specific term, like you're going to say geriatric, and use it as a medical term, then it would be all individuals over the age of, say, 60. And if that's the way it was perceived and defined, then I'd be okay. I'm okay with that. I've entered the geriatric population, but I'm a healthy, vibrant geriatric, which is quite possible. But as we looked at the definition, it's about old and needing health or needing care, special care. So if we are defining geriatrics and senior citizens as the old and needing care, then it becomes a very negative term.
I got nothing on that.
So, I mean, hopefully, kind of seeing kind of where we're going with this is that, the terms that we use can be received in a variety of different ways. Seniors, I don't find it as patronizing. I don't know why dropping the citizen seems so much better, but I think maybe it's just the way the terms have been used over the years and how it has been, senior citizen is more like geriatric, where it's categorized as the older, elderly, frail individuals, as opposed to just, being arriving at a certain age category. The next one is older adults. And I think in academia, that's pretty common, where you just define it, again, based on a numerical system. So older adults, as I've looked at it in like exercise science, generally tends to be more of that population between about 60 and 80. And then 80 and above is often kind of categorized as elderly. Again, it really, when you're using this terminology and basing it on numbers, then, it's better defined, and you fall into a category, Number 6 is people in their 50s and up, which is a mouthful to say. And I just realized as I read the next line below the title, it says another term that's sometimes a mouthful. It is just simply a mouthful. People 50s and up. It says this was popularized by the New York Times style book, and it's flexible to any age group. So you'd have people 40 and up, people in their 70s and up, people over 80. Again, it becomes a bit more descriptive. I think it's a little bit better when it comes to writing, but in general conversation, how much do we generally refer to people as being, my friends that are 50 and up? I guess we probably use it. It's a bit more descriptive, and it is based on just simply the age rather than how we might be perceiving people in that age category. What do you think?
I don't think people that are 50s, I don't really put them in that same category.
Same category?
The same category as we would put someone who would be in that elder realm. I think 50 is more middle-aged. I don't think it's elder age at all. I think you at 50, it's still a young, youthful age. I don't think it should be a substitution as a senior citizen. I don't.
Okay, well then let's go to 60 and up. At what point does it become suddenly, okay, now it's okay to call you old?
I would say, yeah, maybe 60s, but again, age is just a number. I think once you put an age bracket in it, it just, I don't know. I don't think 50s is anywhere close to being senior, like
Okay,
senior-ish, elder-ish.
but again, that's the question. Where does this senior citizen label place people or elderly?
I don't know. I think I don't know. I'm not the ones. I'm also not the one that coined the term senior citizen. So I don't know.
I mean, again, it was coined in the 1930s, so we've moved almost 100 years from then. And, old age has really changed in that last 100 years. And so how we define the older population should reflect where that older population is. Number 7, the final one on the list, is third and fourth age. And it says these are two other academic terms that are gaining popularity across society. Third age refers to the period after retirement, but before a decline in health. Fourth age is one's final years of life. And it says, while these terms do place a lot of emphasis on physical abilities, they are flexible, which I agree they're flexible, but they just seem like kind of, I don't know, odd age terms, but maybe not. I mean, as we're referring to specific populations on the Aging Well podcast, maybe it is useful to say, okay, well, we're talking about those third age individuals, the people that are still in. What our goal in the Aging Well podcast is to prolong that third age, to where the third age is a long and enjoyable period of life. You're able to financially retire from working. You can go do the things that you weren't able to do in the years that you were having kids, paying for college, making money, paying bills, preparing for retirement. Now in retirement, you are in good health, you have good mental capacity, you have the financial well-being to be able to go off and do fun things and exciting things and enjoy those retirement years. And that fourth age should be as short as possible. That, our period of physical decline toward death is going to be a matter of days, months, rather than decades. And so I kind of do like that in a general sense. But, I don't foresee being able to kind of go into a restaurant and say, yeah, I want my third age discount. I'm retired, but I'm still doing great. But what are your thoughts on third age versus fourth age?
I like the terminology. Like I said, if we're going to be super sensitive to the term senior, I think fourth
or say super sensitive.
I think it is super sensitive.
Offensive.
I think it's ridiculous that we're even, you know what I mean?
Do you find that not at all problematic, that you're kind of taking a defensive post to when
not really. I mean, it's just, I feel like I don't know. I think it's good to have an education. It's good to have an open perspective and say, hey, this is, some people get offended by this. And it's like, okay, well, let's pick a different terminology, but let's pick a different terminology that on a huge area, you're going to least offend the most amount of people. And I feel like the 7 that they've listed, they're not too far from the term senior citizen, and you're going to offend someone in some way, shape, or form. But with third or fourth age, there's really no way to offend anyone on that one. Because again, we talked earlier, you have children, you have teenagers, you've got young adults, middle age, and this other demographic, we'll call it the fifth age, right?
Where are you going to fifth age?
Because
it's dead at fifth.
Children, teenagers, young adults, middle age, the next level up, that would be 5. So whether you choose the third age, the fourth age, fifth age, whatever age bracket you want.
You're defining it based on rather fluid kind of.
It is going to be fluid because I think that age is just a number. And I think, yeah, we're going to fall into different categories, but we don't have to be defined by those categories. We can easily just say, you know what, I'm the outlier. I might fall into this geriatric age bracket,
But
but that
again,
doesn't make me a geriatric. That
but
doesn't
you're
make
not
me.
listening to the definition of geriatric. If the definition of geriatric is old and in need of help, then no matter what your age is, you know, you're not falling into that until you are what's considered old and decrepit and, failing, rather than just simply an age number. So if you're going to say that age is just a number, then it has to be categorized based on more something other than the number. And so when we look at like third age, so it's assuming then first age and second age exist. And so I would assume that a first age would be more likely those who are,
Pediatric.
no, not pediatric, because it's those that are in that kind of developmental stage of life where, when you look at education, preparation for future life, for long-term employment, those types of things. So it would likely fall somewhere between, birth and high school graduation, college graduation. And then second life is that stage in life where we are pursuing careers, pursuing families, developing toward retirement. So that would be our foundational or fundamental period of our employment years, when we are working. And then third is where we enter into retirement, where we cease employment and we are pursuing things that are, more what people do in retirement. And then fourth age is that period where our health now notably begins to decline and we're starting to move toward death. And if you define it that way, I think, you could say, well, somebody who, goes straight through high school, college, master's, PhD is kind of prolonging their first age. And you have some people that never really ever kind of get out of that system. Um, you could talk about some of the implications for that. The third age being, those most productive years of our life financially, and, when we are having families and developing and doing all those types of things. Third age should be a period of greater relaxation, enjoyment of the kind of what all that you have reaped and sowed over your life. You get to reap the benefits of that, and then your fourth age, we want to try and minimize that as much as possible so that people are in the best of health as long as possible. They're spending as much time in that third age. And, to a certain extent, the second age might be prolonged or shortened based on how we're able to do career-wise financially. And I think we're looking at, as we define society now, because people are living longer, but they're also living hopefully a bit more well into their older years, that period of second age might end up being a little bit longer. I have a lot of friends that have already retired at 60. I'm 60. I have probably no prospect of retiring for at least another decade. I'd like to teach as long as I can. So my second age could be a little bit longer. I might not be entering my third age until I'm in my 70s. But then that third age, I want that to be as long as possible. And then, boom, just, if anything, just I end my third age and my fourth age within a week would be my goal in life.
Yeah, sounds good.
So I think we kind of follow up and kind of finish up based on how she finishes this blog. It's also important to remember that old age isn't something that's easily defined. While this might have made more sense hundreds of years ago, when not as many people were likely to reach their golden years due to famine, disease, and war, times are changing. So it says today's 50 plus or 60 plus is an arbitrary distinction. It doesn't really mean anything. It does from the standpoint of 50 plus is just a number, But, if we're looking at what terminology we're using to categorize people, we have to understand that older folks are no longer necessarily old. They're just older. And so generally we want to use terminology that is going to reflect the individual as opposed to a perception of the individual.
So then why don't we just use straight across the board positive things? The golden age, golden age individuals. I love that terminology. That's way more positive. You're coming out of retirement or working or whatever it is that you've dedicated a good chunk of your life to. And now you're entering a golden age where you can focus on yourself. That's a positive terminology. Or we can even take the term gold and we can go into silver. We can call them the Silver Sneaker Squad. There's obviously individuals that join Silver Sneakers and they work out and they're active. That's a great age bracket demographic right there. Like, we can keep going with these positive terminologies.
Well, that's the key. I think it's just thinking about how we are defining what is the population we are talking about, and how is the label that is being used being perceived. Like, to use the term senior citizen or elderly, I'm generally going to be thinking of somebody that is likely in nursing home care, as opposed to somebody who is in that third age where they're retired and they're living well on their own and they're traveling the world and doing great things. So I think it's important to consider, how are we defining what it means to age well, and what labels do we use to kind of accompany that or to mark that?
I think that's the age-old question. Age is just a number. You can be as fluid as you want. Even if you fall into one category, that category doesn't have to define you, right?
Yeah, but the question isn't how we define ourselves, it's how others define us and how we receive the definition that others have of us.
Maybe.
And so, the terminology isn't so much how I feel about myself, it's how I perceive other people feel about me. So, if somebody calls me a senior citizen, first of all, most don't. And it's kind of like in classes, I kind of enjoy this, that when I have classes and we talk about aging and exercise and things like that, and I bring up certain terminology and how I fall into this so-called classification, they kind of look at me like, you're not old. It's like, well, I'm 60. And most of them are like, really? But it's how we are perceived that can either encourage us or discourage us.
Yeah, but I think our perceptions are also changing all the time. I remember being 17 thinking that 35 was really, really old. And now I'm going to be 35 this summer. And I'm like, yeah, it's not that old, right? When I was 17, when I was 22 or 23, I was thinking 60 is an old age, but it's not. It's like the older I get, and especially when I was doing personal training, I don't even think 74 is an old age. I think individuals that are in that category of 74 are very fit, very active, very movable, or very mobile. Like I said, I think age is just a number. It doesn't matter what category we fall in or what other people perceive that category to be in. We can be the anomaly. We can be the outlier, right? You're 60. People are like, wow, really? I didn't even think of that. They may have a mindset of what they think 60 is going to be or what they think a senior citizen is going to be, but you're not in that mindset of what they're thinking it is. Does that make sense? You're not the poster child of what they believe that.
Who are they?
Your students.
Okay.
Right? So that's what I'm saying. There's always going to be those outliers. There's always going to be those anomalies. If we look at a teenager, we can say the same thing. Man, teenagers, we stereotype them, but there's always those quote unquote the older souls of those teenagers where they just blow your mind and you're like, oh my gosh, you're going to change the whole entire world. You're not like the rest of your group, your age category. It's the same on both sides of the spectrum.
But that's still ageism.
It may be ageism, or it may be just how we as a society, we clump a huge group of people together. It's just how our brains, it's not necessarily ageism.
No, it is.
Because we do it with not just age. People do it with,
race. It's called racism.
There's
sex. We call it sexism.
No, because ageism, the point ism, there's like a hatred with that group. We're not being, you're just putting people in a stereotype, and it's exactly. Not right. It's not right at all, but it's just how the human mind works. People from overseas in Europe have a perception of how Americans are, right? Oh, Americans are all this way, but we're not all this way, whatever this is.
Misperceptions of people in Europe.
Exactly.
So that doesn't make it right.
It doesn't make it right, but my point is there's always going to be those outliers. The human brain is always going to lump a group of people in certain categories, but there's always those outliers, right? And there's always the ability to change minds, change mentalities, open the door for a whole new perception. And that's why it's important to have these type of conversations.
And it's also important not to categorize people, because if there can be these outliers, you're kind of justifying the categorization of people and the labeling of people. And that's kind of the point that's being made here, is that when we look at the term senior citizen or elderly, you can say, it's just based on a number, but there's also certain perceptions that go along with those labels that people will perceive, you saying that they fit into or don't fit into. And so it's the same as when we, I think we could go on and talk about some of the other different labels that we use, and, we think of, terms like racism, that it's just hatred towards specific races. But when we use the term ageism, we don't say, well, it's hatred towards specific ages. It's biases toward those particular populations or perceptions that don't necessarily have defined accuracy within them. I mean, you look at race, to me, it's pretty fluid, just like age is. It's
totally.
Like, you're not going to label a person just based on the color of their skin, because the skin hues, the colors of skin run a pretty broad range.
Right.
At what point do you break somebody off from, this or that, and it's like, if a person is biracial, well, you have to pick. You're either black or white. You can't be both. The whole labeling of individuals just bothers me tremendously. And I think, when we look at the terms that we use in aging, we obviously have to define certain groups and say, like if we're talking about a group that I worked with in a senior citizen home or a senior home or senior living, that kind of defines that population. But again, as soon as you put a label on them and say, well, those senior citizens, now anytime you use a senior citizen as a label, is going to say, well, it must be referring to me being in a senior care facility. And I'm not. I'm 85, but I'm living on my own. I'm healthy, I'm well, and everything else. And so I kind of lean toward liking more just broader definitions, talking about people as they are. And, if we're going to talk about aging well, then let's consider aging well to be extending our third age and minimizing the fourth age as much as possible. And, if fourth age is a matter of just days, then we've aged well.
I like that. That's good.
Any final comments?
Nope. I think that's a positive note to end on.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast, and please share your comments and email us at agingwell.podcast@gmail.com. And until next time, keep aging well. If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers.